This is the final lecture series of this unit where we study two important concepts in performing animations in computer graphics. These concepts are rigging and skinning. So defining complex 3D objects as a hierarchical data structure allows us to define hierarchical transformations. Hierarchical transformations allow parts of objects to move relative to each other. All vertices in a basic part are transformed the same way. That is, basic parts retain their shape, and we generally have rigid transformations. This works well for objects like tanks with rigid parts or robots. But what about human characters and other objects that have parts that rotate and move, but with surfaces that are flexible rather than rigid? So computer graphics can perform rigid transformation, but how can we capitalize on those rigid transformations and use them in a way to simulate flexible transformations, such as the movement of living objects? So this is where the concept of rigging comes in. Animation is usually specified using some sort of low-dimensional controls, as opposed to remodeling the actual geometry of each frame. The joint angles, known as bone transformations in a hierarchical character, determine the pose. Building the controls is called rigging. Skinning provides a means to animate a model while reducing the folding and creasing effects of polygons as the model animates. A model is represented in two parts. There is the skin, so first part is the skin, the second part is the skeleton. Skin is described by the triangular mesh, whereas skeleton is the underlying bones of the model. And in your rendering, you don't actually see the skeleton, you only see the triangular mesh. However, the triangular mesh is animated with the help of the skeleton. So how is skinning implemented? We define a bone hierarchy in a model. The mesh triangle data is defined separately. The bone hierarchy is linked to the model's mesh so that animating the bone hierarchy animates the mesh vertices. So there is a link between the bones and the mesh. So the mesh is linked to the bones in the same hierarchical way as we defined hierarchical models. Note that multiple bones can affect each vertex in the skin mesh, and this is where the smoothing effect is achieved. So every vertex in the mesh can be affected by more than one bones, and possibly by all bones. So we can have a weighing value for each bone to determine how much influence it has in proportion to the others. So we will weight the effect of every bone on every point, and generally the bone that is closest to a vertex point will have higher effect on that vertex, whereas bones that are further away will have less effect, and hence at the joints we might end up with vertex points that are equally affected by the bones on either side of the joint. Here is an example of a hand. So the color triangles are attached to one bone. So different colors represent their association with a specific bone. Black triangles are attached to more than one bone. So we see that at every intersection, and specifically for regions where we might expect a folding of the skin, such as this one, is colored black. And that basically means that these vertices are affected by more than one bone, which would be the bone associated with this part as well as this part. And the same goes for points over here, which will have a stretching effect, and hence these vertices are colored black. And hence we see the black triangles to be clustered near the joints. Smooth skinning and bone weights. To make deformations appear smooth, we need to average between the effects of different bones close to the joints. Bone weights can be set using modeling software. So this is very difficult to do manually. So you'll have to use some modeling software such as Blender to determine the bone weights. They are displayed using colors in Blender in weight paint mode. So if you select weight paint mode, you will see colors on the skin. Red is close to 1 and blue is close to 0. So it's basically a heat map. So from 0 you have blue to 1 where you have red color. There are a number of standard ways of setting weights. So the first method is automatic, which is automatic geometric weighing. This is in your project. The other one is manual, where you actually go and perform manual tweaking and you perform weight painting. That's because you're moving the colors around. And the third method is bone envelopes, which specify a distance that each bone affects. Skinning a character. To skin a character, we embed a skeleton into a detailed character mesh. So if you see here, the detailed character is a heavy rabbit, whereas the skeleton is just a connection of some thin bones. And then we animate the bones by using transformation matrices or specifying movements as joint angles. We specify these joint angles only for keyframes, as discussed in the previous lecture, and then we interpolate between the keyframes to generate many more frames in between so that the animation is smooth. Then we bind the skin vertices to the bones. So animating the skeleton will move the skin with it.